Hey guys, and welcome to Toby Talks Tech. I'm Toby, and today we're going to talk some tech. A lot of people are really keen to learn how to build websites and modern web applications, and so this tutorial series is going to cover everything from start to finish. However, before we jump into the deep end, you really need to understand the very fundamentals of how the internet works and how client and server applications interact with one another. So in this video, I'm going to give you a 5-minute crash course on everything you ever needed to know about the internet. This is you. Just imagine for a moment that you're on your computer and you're browsing the internet and you are going to go to www, which is fancy talk for www, but that's a bit of a mouthful, so people like to say www.google.com. Now, the very first thing that your computer will do, it will do a DNS lookup. DNS stands for Domain Name System, and it sounds really technical and complicated, but essentially it's like an address book. Google.com means nothing to a computer. It just means something to a person, to a human. Computers don't need fancy names on things. They work much better with just wanting to know the address. So imagine that Google.com is like the name in the address book, like, I don't know, Hans Gruber, and the DNS entry will say this name is actually this address. So your browser will essentially look up www.google.com and translate it into an address, into an IP address. So for example, google.com may have an IP address of 198.142.187.241. Now, to a human, this may not mean anything. We prefer Google, but to a computer, this is a valid, perfectly valid address of some other computer somewhere out there in the internet. Now, the next thing that happens is that your computer sends this request as a GET request, so it's saying, someone get me some information. It's sending that request off to this particular IP address, and that is going to go into the big internet cloud at first. Now, the internet obviously is more than one computer. Between you and the internet, there's the ISP, there's lots of machines, so your request essentially is going to get routed between different machines and different servers and different routers, all the way through the internet until at some point, at the very end, somewhere out there in the world is a web server with the address 198.142.187.241. So there is a web server out there in the world somewhere that has that IP address that your request is going to be sent to. So your request is now going to come into the server, and the server is going to receive that request as a GET request. Someone's requesting some information. So the server now knows I need to do something. I need to process this request. And this processing can be as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. That may simply be a request to give me an image, or it may be, look up something in a database, or do a search, or show me the news, or the latest Twitter feeds, or, play this YouTube video. So it just does some processing on the incoming request, and then it is going to send back a response. Obviously, your request contained the sender information, the address of the sender, just like mail. So the server is now going to send a response back to the IP address of your particular computer. Again, this request is going to bounce through different servers and networks and routers across the internet, and eventually it's going to come back to your browser. In this response that you received from the server, you will find a number of different pieces of information. For one, you will find a status code, or it's called an HTTP status code, and that essentially just tells your computer whether your request was successful or it was denied or there was an internal error. Most of the time, you should get a status code of 200 back, which means everything went okay, so everything is good, thumbs up. And then, along with the status code in the response, you will also find some content. This content can obviously be whatever you want. Most of the time that's simply some data to display, or maybe it's some styling information with CSS, or some links to other websites, or potentially some code that then gets run on your computer or within your browser. While the machine at the back that is servicing that request is called a server because it's servicing the request, it's serving content, the machine that you're sitting at is considered the client application. It's just someone connecting to a server to interact with it, and that means either receiving or sending information. Now, when you want to build a web application, the pieces that you need to build, that you need to code and deploy somewhere onto a computer is the processing logic that happens on the web server, And obviously you need to have a machine somewhere yourself, a web server either in AWS, which is what we're going to set up, but you can also for development purposes run this locally on your own computer, so you don't need another machine somewhere else. And the code that you need to write needs to include all of this processing logic that sits within the web server, and it needs to include all of the content and the code and the data and styling that you want to send back to the client within the responses from the web server. So essentially, web server, all of the processing logic and anything that you want to send back to the client, you need to develop yourself and then obviously deploy it out to a machine, or what we're going to do, into AWS. And that's essentially the very, very, very simplistic basics of how the web works and how you develop your own web application. And that's all there is to it. You should now know everything you'll ever need to know about how the internet works. If you enjoyed this video, please show your support by liking, favoriting and sharing it around. Don't forget to subscribe if you do want to see more cool videos, and if you do have any comments, questions or suggestions, just leave them down in the section below. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I will see you later.